The morning had started like any other for the single dad. The sunlight streamed softly through the kitchen window, painting golden lines across the floor. He moved quietly, careful not to wake his child, who was still curled up in bed. The smell of coffee filled the small apartment, mingling with the faint scent of bread from the nearby bakery. It was a simple life, full of routines, but it carried a rhythm that he had grown to find comfort in. He had learned long ago how to balance everything: work, parenting, and the little pieces of life that made him feel alive. Today, like every other, he was up early, making breakfast, packing a lunch, and getting his child ready for school. There was a gentle determination in the way he moved, a quiet strength that came from years of learning to handle life alone. Even though he carried the weight of responsibility, there was something light in his spirit, a kindness that shone in his small gestures. After breakfast, they walked to the school together, holding hands, the child chatting excitedly about what they would learn that day. He listened patiently, asking questions and encouraging stories, even though his mind was partly on the tasks that awaited him. Today there was something different on the schedule, a community talent show in the evening at the local hall. He wasn't a participant, only there to help, to polish the stage and make sure everything looked perfect. But there was a quiet anticipation in the air, and he felt a subtle pull of curiosity. Arriving at the hall, he could already hear the faint hum of preparation. Volunteers were setting up chairs, decorating the stage, and running through last-minute checks. The smell of polish and fresh paint mingled with the faint scent of flowers that someone had placed near the entrance. He smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction in helping make the space ready. There was pride in the small things, in the way the hall began to shine under his careful touch. He bent down, polishing the stage boards with a steady rhythm. Each swipe of the cloth was methodical, almost meditative. It was a moment of quiet in a busy day, a small pocket of peace. He glanced around, watching others scurry about with their tasks, their faces a mixture of focus and excitement. It reminded him of the importance of every role, no matter how unnoticed it might seem. Today, he was the silent support, the invisible hand that would make everything look perfect. While he worked, memories floated into his mind. He thought of the first time he had brought his child to a community event like this, how nervous he had been, unsure of whether he could manage both the responsibilities and the expectations. He remembered holding tightly to a tiny hand, the child's wide eyes filled with wonder. Those memories made his chest swell with a mixture of nostalgia and pride. Even now, he felt that same protective instinct, a desire to shield and guide, to make the world a safe and beautiful place for the person he loved most. The child appeared beside him, quietly observing. There was admiration in their eyes, a reflection of the respect that the child felt for a parent who did so much without complaint. "Do you think it will look nice, Dad?" the child asked softly. He smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "It will look perfect," he replied. He appreciated these moments, the small exchanges that carried so much meaning. They were simple, yet they built a bridge of trust and love that nothing else could replace. As the morning stretched on, performers began arriving, carrying instruments, costumes, and scripts. The hall slowly transformed into a space brimming with possibility. He noticed the nervous glances, the quiet whispers among the participants. Some were children, their energy bubbling over. Others were adults, seasoned performers trying to hide the butterflies in their stomachs. He continued polishing, but now his ears caught fragments of conversations, talk of nerves, excitement, and hope. Each snippet made him think of his own life, the balance between fear and courage, and how often one had to step forward even when uncertain. Between the tasks, he found a moment to glance at the piano that sat slightly off-center on the stage. He had played it before years ago, when the apartment had been filled with the soft sounds of practice and music. He ran his fingers over the keys absent-mindedly, feeling the smoothness beneath his touch. The memory of melodies long ago coming back to him in faint echoes. It was a skill that had never left him, tucked away quietly like a secret treasure, only to be called upon when needed. A volunteer approached, carrying a stack of papers. "Do you want to help with these?" she asked. He nodded, taking them carefully. Even while handling small organizational tasks, he kept an eye on the performers, noticing the subtle tension in their shoulders, the hurried steps across the stage. It was a moment of observation, of understanding the flow of the day, knowing when to step in and when to step back. The child tugged gently at his sleeve, pointing at the piano. "Do you think someone will play that today?" The question hung in the air, innocent but pointed. He smiled, unsure of how to answer, caught between honesty and the desire to protect the simplicity of the moment. "Maybe," he said softly. "Maybe someone will." There was a quiet truth in that answer, a recognition of possibility without promise. As the afternoon approached, the hall became busier. More participants arrived. The crowd outside started to gather, and the atmosphere shifted from preparation to anticipation. He moved through the space with a calm presence, helping where needed, adjusting chairs, polishing one last area of the stage. The physical work was satisfying, grounding him in the moment. Yet beneath that there was a subtle tension, a sense that today might be different, that something unexpected could happen. He looked at the child, who was now sitting quietly, watching the flurry of activity. There was trust in that gaze, an unspoken understanding that they were together in this moment. He felt a surge of determination, not just to perform his duties, but to be present, fully, to witness and protect the small universe they shared. And then, a small commotion near the backstage area drew his attention. A scheduled performer had arrived, looked around nervously, and then rushed out again, whispering apologies. The volunteers exchanged worried glances. There was a gap, a momentary void in the schedule. He watched, hand still resting on the polished stage, the child leaning close, sensing that something had shifted. No one spoke directly to him, but their eyes held a question, a silent inquiry. Could he fill the space? He shook his head slightly, returning to his polishing, pretending not to notice. But inside, a quiet recognition began to stir. The room was ready, the piano was waiting, and though he had come only to help, there was a tiny spark of possibility forming, a whisper of what might be. As the audience began filing in, he continued his work with steady hands, but every now and then, he found himself glancing at the piano, at the stage, at the soft lights that would soon shine on the performers. He breathed in deeply, savoring the moment, knowing that this ordinary day had a heartbeat that could shift in an instant. The ordinary tasks, the quiet dedication, and the love for his child were all threads in a larger tapestry that was about to reveal something unexpected. He finished the last sweep of the polish, stepped back and allowed himself a brief pause. The hall was ready. The stage shone. The music, though silent for now, waited patiently for the right hands to awaken it. And he, who had come simply to help, felt a stirring within him, a quiet, unassuming readiness for something he could not yet name. Today he was just a single dad polishing the stage. But soon he would discover that even the simplest of beginnings can lead to moments that touch hearts and change lives in ways no one could predict. The atmosphere backstage had shifted. The cancellation of the scheduled performer left a ripple of uncertainty, and the organizers were now scanning the room for anyone who could step in. Panic flickered in their eyes, but they tried to mask it with forced smiles. The single dad was still adjusting chairs near the stage, wiping sweat from his brow when he noticed the anxious glances. He continued with his task, but there was a tension that made the air feel heavier. The child stood beside him, sensing something was amiss, their small hand lightly gripping his. One of the volunteers approached him cautiously. "We need someone to play. The scheduled performer can't make it. Could you maybe play something?" The words hung awkwardly in the air. He froze for a moment, feeling a cold wave of surprise. Play him? He had only come to help, to polish the stage and support the show. Music had been part of his life, yes, but performing in front of a crowd was something entirely different. His mind raced, weighing possibilities against fears. He thought of the crowded hall, the bright lights, the eyes of strangers all fixed on whoever sat at that piano. His hands, which had so confidently polished the stage moments ago, now felt uncertain. He swallowed, unsure if he could even remember the notes under the weight of the moment. He could hear the child's tiny breath, steady but expectant, and that added a strange mix of courage and responsibility. The volunteer, sensing his hesitation, added gently, "I know it's sudden, but everyone believes in you. Just, if you feel ready, please." There was a pause, and he looked at the piano. Its polished black surface gleamed, reflecting the soft stage lights. Memories of quieter moments at home, when he had played for himself and the child, came flooding back. The music had always been his private comfort, a way to express what words could not. but now it was public, vulnerable, and intimidating. He glanced at his child, who looked up with wide eyes full of hope and trust. The child's quiet faith in him, the belief that he could step forward, struck a chord deep inside. He nodded slowly, more to himself than anyone else. This wasn't about recognition or applause. It was about showing courage, about seizing a moment, about being present in the way his child already believed he could. He took a deep breath and finally said, "All right, I'll play." The organizers moved quickly, helping him adjust the piano bench and ensuring the sheet music was ready. He felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach, a mixture of excitement and fear. He adjusted his tie, straightened his posture, and tried to center himself. The child squeezed his hand and whispered, "You can do it." That simple encouragement, pure and unselfish, made him feel stronger. It reminded him why he had always kept music close, because it could reach hearts, even in silence. As he sat down at the piano, he felt the smooth keys under his fingers, familiar yet charged with the unfamiliar energy of the moment. The hall was slowly filling with audience members, their chatter a low hum in the background. The bright lights above made the room seem larger, more daunting. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sounds and memories of past practice sessions fill his mind. He imagined playing not for the crowd, but for the child who had trusted him, for the quiet hope of sharing something meaningful. A hush fell over the audience as someone announced his name. He felt a rush of adrenaline and a twinge of panic, but he focused on breathing. One finger at a time, he pressed a key, then another, then a chord. The first notes were hesitant, almost fragile, but the warmth of the sound quickly enveloped him. Slowly, confidence began to build, like sunlight creeping over a dark horizon. He played the first few bars, simple yet deliberate, allowing the melody to flow naturally. He wasn't thinking of perfection or judgment. He was simply allowing the music to express what he had always felt, the emotions he rarely shared. The child watched, eyes wide, recognizing the courage it took for their parent to step into the spotlight. The connection between them was electric, unspoken, and deeply grounding. As the performance continued, the music gained strength and complexity. Each note carried layers of feeling, love, struggle, resilience, and hope. His mind wandered to the late nights spent practicing alone, to the sacrifices he had made, and to the small joys that had made it all worthwhile. The hall seemed to melt around him, leaving only the sound, the moment, and the presence of the child who had believed in him from the start. A few audience members began to notice the depth in his playing, the emotion that poured from every keystroke. Some shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if drawn into an invisible narrative. The music spoke without words, telling stories of perseverance, of quiet strength, and of love that transcended hardships. He felt a connection to the room, a bridge formed by the invisible threads of shared human emotion. Behind the stage, volunteers whispered among themselves, amazed at the sudden transformation of a quiet helper into a performer who commanded the room without even trying. The dad played on, unaware of the attention, lost in the rhythm and flow of his own expression. The child's small face reflected awe and pride, reinforcing the courage he had summoned moments ago. As the middle of the piece approached, he allowed the music to breathe, letting pauses linger, allowing every note to resonate. He could sense the emotional weight in the audience, even if he didn't see it clearly. There were small movements, subtle shifts, people holding their breath, hands brushing away tears, eyes glistening. Each reaction fed his determination, not in vanity, but in the silent understanding that the music was touching hearts. He played with a mixture of restraint and passion, carefully balancing technical precision with the rawness of feeling. Memories of late nights at home, the quiet laughter and the small tears shared with his child filtered into each chord. He was telling a story of ordinary life and extraordinary love without saying a single word. The stage was no longer just polished wood. It had become a vessel for the life he had quietly lived. The final section approached, and he allowed the melody to swell, to rise and fall like the waves of a calm but powerful sea. There was a fullness in the sound, a richness born of authenticity and lived experience. He glanced briefly at the child, who was now holding onto the edge of the seat, eyes wide and mouth slightly open in silent admiration. That glance was enough to steady him, to remind him why he had stepped forward in the first place. The closing notes resonated through the hall, lingering in the air like a soft echo of truth. He let the final chord hang, fingers still resting lightly on the keys, breathing deeply. allowing the silence to absorb the weight of what had just passed. The audience remained still for a heartbeat, and then applause began, hesitant at first, then growing in volume and warmth. It wasn't just applause for music. It was applause for courage, for vulnerability, for the quiet heroism of a single dad who had simply stepped up when the moment demanded it. He stood slowly, shaking slightly from the adrenaline and emotion, and the child rushed forward, wrapping small arms around his waist. The embrace was filled with pride, gratitude, and love, the kind that needed no words. Around them, the audience clapped, some wiping tears, some cheering quietly, all moved by the unexpected performance that had grown from an ordinary act of help into an extraordinary moment of connection. Backstage, volunteers and organizers exchanged amazed glances. They had expected someone to simply fill in, but what had happened was more than anyone could have imagined. The stage, once polished and ordinary, had become a place where lives and emotions intersected, where the music reflected not just talent, but the essence of a human story lived with care and courage. As they walked home later, the single dad carried a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The child held his hand, talking softly about how wonderful it had been, and he listened, smiling, feeling that deep warmth of connection that made all the struggles worthwhile. Today had started as an ordinary day of polishing a stage, but it had transformed into a memory that would remain in both their hearts forever. And though he would never seek fame, never expect accolades, he understood that this moment, born from hesitation and courage, had touched more than just ears. It had reached souls, and that was the true gift of stepping forward, of daring to share one's heart when life unexpectedly asks for it. The moment his fingers touched the keys, a hush fell over the hall. The audience, already buzzing with expectation, seemed to lean closer, drawn into the soft, hesitant notes that emerged first. The sound was gentle, almost fragile, as if testing the air before committing fully. He allowed himself to feel every vibration, every resonance, letting the music flow naturally, not thinking about technique or perfection, only about expression. Each note became a word, each chord a sentence telling stories that words could not capture. At first, some in the audience shifted in their seats, unsure of what to expect. The notes were simple, delicate, almost shy. Yet there was an authenticity in their delivery that pulled at the heart. The single dad closed his eyes briefly, picturing the quiet evenings at home when he had played alone, letting the music speak to the emptiness and joy in his life. Those memories flowed through him, and with them came confidence, subtle but powerful. The child watched in awe, gripping the edge of the seat, leaning forward as if trying to absorb every sound. The small hand that had held his during rehearsals now clenched and unclenched with anticipation. There was a mix of pride and wonder in their eyes, a recognition that their parent was sharing something deeply personal, something that went beyond words and actions. The child's presence grounded him, reminding him that this performance was not about applause or recognition, but about connection, about love expressed through sound. Slowly, the melody began to build, moving from the tentative beginning into a flowing, graceful rhythm. The notes intertwined, carrying a story of quiet perseverance and the small victories of life. His hands moved with increasing confidence, guided by memory and emotion rather than sheet music or preparation. The audience began to notice the shift, the subtle power behind each chord, and their posture changed, leaning in, eyes widening, hearts opening. He felt the energy of the room without seeing it directly. The air seemed to vibrate with the unspoken understanding that this was not just a performance but a sharing of a lifetime of experiences. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every small moment of joy and pain was encoded in the music. His mind wandered briefly to the late nights when he practiced alone, the quiet hum of the piano filling the empty apartment, a companion to his thoughts. Those memories infused the performance with a raw authenticity that resonated deeply. The first few audience members began to whisper, caught off guard by the depth of feeling emanating from someone who had appeared so ordinary moments ago. Their eyes glistened, some brushing tears discreetly from their cheeks. The single dad played on, unaware of their reactions, focused entirely on the melody, on the emotion behind each note, on the story he was sharing without speaking. He let his hands flow naturally, allowing small improvisations to emerge, subtle flourishes that reflected his personal journey. The hall itself seemed to transform. The bright light softened in the audience's perception, becoming a gentle glow that highlighted the music rather than the performer. The piano, once just an instrument, became a vessel for memory and feeling, each key a conduit for the complexity of human experience. The single dad's posture remained humble, shoulders relaxed but attentive, as though he were not performing for strangers but conversing with old friends through music. At the center of the melody, the music grew more expressive, rich with emotion, yet controlled with the finesse of someone who had practiced for years in private. The room responded. Audience members, previously cautious, now allowed themselves to be carried along. Some leaned closer to one another, sharing the unspoken bond of being moved together. The child's small face reflected joy and pride, eyes wide and shining, and the single dad's brief glance at them sparked an internal warmth, a silent affirmation that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As he continued, he incorporated subtle variations in tempo, allowing the music to breathe naturally. The dynamic shifted from soft and tender passages to stronger, more expressive moments, echoing the ebb and flow of life itself. He imagined the struggles he had overcome, the quiet nights of doubt and exhaustion, and he let that journey shape the way each note was played. The audience began to sense the narrative embedded in the music, though no words were spoken. They felt the story of a life lived with resilience, of love expressed in countless small ways, of courage emerging from the ordinary. A few performers backstage paused to watch, captivated by the transformation taking place. They had expected a simple filler, a brief performance to keep the schedule intact, but instead they witnessed someone who had stepped forward with humility and was now communicating something profound. The single dad remained unaware of their admiration, entirely immersed in the conversation between his heart and the piano. Each chord carried emotion that transcended age and background, touching everyone present in ways they had not anticipated. The middle of the piece approached, and he allowed himself a brief pause, letting the last chord resonate fully. Silence followed for a moment, thick with anticipation and emotion. Then he continued, introducing a slightly more complex melody, weaving in intricate harmonies that reflected both technical skill and personal expression. It was a moment of release, a culmination of the quiet tension that had built since his first hesitant notes. His hands glided over the keys, guided by intuition and emotion, creating layers of sound that drew the audience deeper into the story. The child's eyes sparkled with admiration, seeing their parent perform not for recognition but for the sheer joy and expression of music. It was a lesson in courage and authenticity, a demonstration that sometimes the most powerful acts are those that arise from the heart, rather than expectation. The single dad noticed the child's expression for a fleeting second and smiled inwardly, feeling that shared understanding, that bond of trust and love that had always been at the center of their relationship. As the piece progressed, the music grew more expansive, filling every corner of the hall. The audience was drawn in, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, letting the sound envelop them. There was no need for applause yet, no need for recognition. The connection was immediate, emotional, and unspoken. He allowed the melodies to carry him, to guide the room, letting each note reflect a moment of his life, moments of struggle, moments of tenderness, moments of hope. Backstage, volunteers and performers whispered softly among themselves, caught between admiration and disbelief. They had expected a simple performance, perhaps even a nervous attempt, but this was something different. The music spoke of lived experience, of personal sacrifice and quiet victories, and it resonated far beyond the technical skill of playing. It touched something fundamental in everyone present. He reached a section of the piece where the tempo slowed, the chords deepening, carrying a weight of emotion that was palpable. He imagined the challenges he had faced as a single parent, the nights of worry, the moments of uncertainty, and the simple joys that had made it all worthwhile. Those feelings were translated into sound, flowing freely from his hands to the piano and into the hearts of the audience. The child shifted closer, almost holding their breath, sensing the depth and importance of the moment. The single dad felt the presence of his audience not as strangers, but as fellow travelers in the human experience. He allowed the music to become a dialogue, each note a word, each phrase a sentence, speaking of resilience, love, and hope without uttering a single syllable. As the piece neared its climax, the energy swelled. the melodies intertwined in intricate patterns, rising and falling like waves. He felt the physical sensation of the music moving through him, the vibration of the keys, the resonance in his chest, the subtle shiver of connection with the audience. Every eye in the hall was fixed, every ear attuned, every heart touched. It was a moment of shared humanity, born from courage, humility, and the willingness to step into the unknown. Finally, the music began to descend, the notes slowing, softening. Coming to a gentle conclusion, he allowed the last chord to linger, pressing it firmly yet delicately, and then released. Silence filled the hall for a heartbeat, a collective pause where the audience absorbed the impact of what they had just experienced. It was more than a performance. It was an offering of life, emotion, and truth. The single dad rose slowly, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and quiet pride washing over him. The child ran forward, embracing him tightly, their small arms radiating love and admiration. The applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, warmer, more genuine. People were moved not just by the music, but by the authenticity and courage behind it. Some were wiping away tears, some were smiling through quiet emotion, all sharing a moment of collective acknowledgement for a life lived with heart and dedication. Backstage, whispers of amazement spread among the volunteers and performers. The unexpected had become extraordinary. The man who had come to polish the stage had shared something far deeper than music. He had shared a piece of his soul, his journey, and his love. And the audience had received it silently, openly, and fully, in a way that would remain with them long after the final note faded. As they walked home later, the single dad and child were quiet for a while, letting the memory of the music settle. Then the child spoke softly, recounting favorite parts of the performance, and he smiled, listening with a warmth that reached deep into his heart. Today, the stage had become more than polished wood and lights. It had become a place where courage, love, and human connection were expressed in their purest form. And he knew without doubt that this moment would remain in their lives forever, a reminder that ordinary people can create extraordinary impact simply by stepping forward with honesty and heart. The music had already captured the audience's attention, but now it began to carry them somewhere deeper. Each note was deliberate, flowing with emotion that words could never convey. The single dad allowed the melody to swell, to rise and fall with the feelings that had built over years of quiet struggle and love. His fingers moved with both strength and tenderness. Each key pressed a reflection of moments he had lived, moments of worry, moments of joy, and moments of deep, personal reflection. He glanced at the child, who watched with rapt attention. There was awe and pride in their expression, a mixture of fascination and understanding that this music was more than just sound. It was a piece of the father's life, shared openly and honestly. That glance alone filled him with courage, reinforcing the reason he had agreed to play. It was not about impressing anyone else. It was about giving a part of himself to the child who had always believed in him. The hall seemed to breathe with the music, every listener leaning into the notes as though they were soft hands guiding them through the story. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, carrying memories of their own struggles, their own joys, and their own loves. The piece became a conversation between the performer and the audience, one that transcended speech, reaching into the heart where emotion lives. He allowed his mind to wander to the life he had lived. The night spent alone in the apartment, practicing and perfecting melodies for no one but himself. Those private moments now found purpose in the public space of the hall. He poured all of that into the music, the quiet dedication, the perseverance through exhaustion, the joy of little victories, and the constant presence of his child who had made every sacrifice worth it. A tremor of vulnerability ran through him as he pressed down on the keys, remembering hardships and losses that had shaped his life. The music reflected them, not as sorrow alone, but as experiences that had strengthened him, taught him resilience, and deepened his capacity for love. There was a raw honesty in every note, an invitation for the audience to feel alongside him, and they responded without hesitation. Tears began to form in the eyes of some listeners, unbidden and unrestrained. They could feel the emotions embedded in each phrase, the authenticity of someone sharing their soul. The single dad did not play for admiration or applause. He played to communicate the truth of his journey, to bridge the gap between performer and listener with the purest medium he knew: music. Backstage, volunteers exchanged quiet glances, amazed at how a man who had arrived merely to polish the stage had become the heartbeat of the hall. The performance was transforming from a simple fill-in into an unforgettable moment. Even seasoned performers felt the intensity, recognizing the rare depth of expression in what might have seemed like an ordinary act. The music continued, ebbing and flowing like a tide. There were moments of soft reflection, notes that lingered in the air, gentle and thoughtful. Then without warning, the tempo rose, the melody gaining strength and passion. He played with controlled intensity, each chord striking with emotional clarity, conveying both the weight of challenges overcome and the hope that had persisted through them. The child's small hands clenched in excitement, eyes wide, completely absorbed. They felt the emotion, recognized the effort, and saw the courage it took to share so openly. That presence, that shared witness gave him even more strength. He was no longer performing in isolation. He was creating a dialogue with everyone present, a bond that transcended words. In the audience, people shifted closer to one another, some holding hands, some brushing away tears quietly. There was a shared understanding forming, an invisible thread connecting each person through the vulnerability and beauty of the music. The single dad played on, unaware of the collective emotional journey he had taken them on, focused entirely on conveying what he felt within. As the climax approached, the music became both grand and intimate. The harmonies layered together, reflecting complexity and depth, while the tempo carried a sense of urgency and importance. Each note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. He imagined the obstacles he had faced, the loneliness, the moments of doubt, and he allowed those experiences to inform the melody, transforming it into something universal yet intensely personal. The audience felt it, felt the human story woven into the performance. Their hearts responded to the sincerity of his expression. Some were weeping openly, moved beyond control. The sound resonated in their chests as though it had always been waiting for them, each chord unlocking emotions they had kept hidden. He glanced again at his child, who was now perched on the edge of their seat. A mixture of pride, wonder, and emotional intensity reflected on their face. That single glance reminded him why he had taken this step, why he had dared to perform, and why every sacrifice had been worth it. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was life, memory, love, and hope intertwined and shared openly with the world. The final segment approached, and he let the melody soar, giving every ounce of emotion he could summon. There were flashes of brilliance in the crescendos, delicate nuances in the soft passages, each a mirror to the journey that had led him to this stage. The audience was captivated, their breathing slowed, their hearts attuned to the intimate narrative unfolding before them. He felt exhaustion creeping in, the physical toll of intense focus, but he welcomed it. Every tiredness was proof of effort, proof of commitment, proof that he had given himself fully to this moment. He pressed each note with intention, ensuring that the weight of experience and emotion reached the audience with clarity. The hall was no longer just a hall, it was a vessel, carrying the shared human story between performer and listeners. A quiet murmur ran through the room as the final notes lingered, stretching into silence. The single dad allowed the last chord to resonate fully, fingers hovering above the keys as if not wanting to break the connection just yet. Then he let his hands rest, closing his eyes briefly to absorb the collective energy, the shared emotional release. The silence was replaced by applause, gentle at first, then growing in strength and warmth. People were not clapping simply for a performance. They were acknowledging courage, vulnerability, and the beauty of a life fully shared through art. Tears were wiped away. Cheeks flushed and hearts felt lighter and heavier all at once, touched by the depth of emotion expressed. The child ran forward, embracing the single dad, their small arms full of admiration, love, and gratitude. He hugged back tightly, feeling the culmination of the entire experience in that single moment. Around them, the audience continued to clap, some standing, some quietly sobbing, all united in the shared journey they had witnessed. Backstage, whispers of amazement spread. The man who had come to polish the stage had delivered a performance that transcended talent. It was a declaration of humanity, of love, of struggle, and of hope. Volunteers and performers alike felt privileged to witness something so genuine and powerful. The stage, once ordinary, had become sacred, holding the imprint of courage and emotional truth. As the applause gradually died down, He allowed himself a moment to breathe, to look at the child and to let the emotions settle. This had been more than a performance. It had been a gift, a conversation, a life shared through the universal language of music. The audience had been transformed, moved in ways they could feel but not fully describe. And he, who had only intended to help, had discovered the extraordinary within the ordinary. Walking home later, the single dad and child remained quiet for a while, letting the memory of the performance linger. The street seemed brighter, the air lighter, carrying the echoes of music that had touched hearts. The child spoke softly of favorite moments, and he smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction of having shared something meaningful. Today had begun as an ordinary day, a day of polishing a stage, but it had transformed into a timeless memory, one that would remain etched in both their hearts forever. He understood now that courage often appears quietly, that ordinary people can create extraordinary moments when life calls them to step forward. And in that understanding he found peace, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that even in the simplest acts, the human heart has the power to reach out and touch the lives of others in ways that last a lifetime. The final notes had faded into the air, leaving a profound silence that hung over the hall like a soft veil. For a moment it seemed as if time had paused, allowing everyone to absorb the weight and beauty of what had just been shared. The single dad's fingers rested lightly on the piano keys, not wanting to disturb the resonance of the last chord. He felt a quiet stillness within himself, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and deep fulfillment. This had been more than a performance. It had been a lifetime of emotion, distilled into music. Slowly, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was heartfelt, genuine, and sustained. Some clapped with trembling hands, others with tears running silently down their cheeks. The room vibrated with gratitude and admiration, not just for the technical skill displayed, but for the courage it took to expose one's heart so openly. The single dad rose from the bench, taking in the sight of the standing ovation, feeling a warmth that radiated from the shared experience of human connection. The child leapt forward, wrapping arms tightly around his waist, pressing a small face into his side. The embrace was pure and unself-conscious, filled with pride and love. He hugged back, closing his eyes briefly to savor the moment, feeling a wave of emotion that was both grounding and overwhelming. The performance had been for many people, but in the end it was for this child, this precious presence that had been the silent motivator behind every note, every chord, every hesitant step forward. Volunteers and organizers approached, their faces a mixture of awe and admiration. They spoke softly, words tumbling out in praise and surprise. They had not expected such depth, such emotion, such raw humanity from someone who had come merely to help polish the stage. Some offered hugs, others extended hands in congratulations, all of them conveying the simple truth that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. He smiled humbly, nodding in thanks, but he felt no need for accolades. The applause, the kind words, the recognition, they were secondary. What mattered most was the connection that had formed, the emotional resonance that had flowed from his heart through his fingers and into the hearts of others. He understood now that true impact does not come from seeking approval, but from the courage to be authentic and the willingness to share one's truth. As people began to leave, many paused to offer quiet thanks, their eyes glistening with emotion. Some approached, sharing personal stories of struggle and resilience, expressing how the music had mirrored their own experiences. He listened patiently, feeling honored by their openness, yet aware that the real reward lay in the simple knowledge that he had reached them in a meaningful way. The hall had become a shared space of vulnerability and understanding, where strangers had been brought together by the honesty of a single human heart. The child tugged gently at his hand, eyes wide with wonder. "Dad, that was amazing. Everyone was crying and I was so proud of you." He knelt down, looking into those bright, innocent eyes, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. It was in these small moments, in the quiet acknowledgments of love and admiration, that life revealed its deepest meaning.